All right, at this time, I'd like to welcome in my guest, Rachel Wherley, to the show. She is better known as that little mom on Instagram and TikTok. But I wanted to bring Rachel on today to talk about not only just her story, but the message that she's trying to share with everyone about inclusion and the importance of inclusion. So welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here and talk about something I'm so passionate about.
Yeah, great. So why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself, kind of introduce yourself to my audience, kind of let them know who you are, and then we can kind of go more into your story.
Oh, certainly. So, the most obvious part of me when people see me, but definitely not the biggest part of my personality, is I have achondroplasia dwarfism. Excuse me. And with that, that means that I am 4'4", 32 years old. I have a type of dwarfism that makes it so my limbs are shorter, but my torso's tall, like average height. So when I sit next to somebody, I'm like looking eye to eye to them. And for those who maybe are listening rather than watching, some people that maybe they're familiar with who also have my condition, like is Wee Man, if y'all remember the show he used to be on. Peter Dinklage, like he has the same form of dwarfism as me. Okay. So, and for me and for my husband, who's also a little person, we came from a family of average height people, and there's nothing they passed on. It's just a spontaneous mutation for about 80% of the population that have dwarfism. And, but now he and we have a daughter who's average height, which is tall, doesn't have dwarfism. And we're pregnant. I'm pregnant. Greg gets no credit there. Maybe a little, but I'm pregnant. 8 months along with a little girl who has dwarfism, just like us. So there are some people that inherit it from their parents, like our little girl will.
Wow, that's well. Hopefully, by the way, back on that. Hopefully, Greg did have something to do with it.
He had something to do with it. Yeah, no, I said that. I was like, there was definitely a part. He had to play. Yeah.
But it's also interesting, just the dynamics, like you said, just like, okay, you both come from families that are normal height, whatever, and then you have an average or normal height daughter, but then also now are going to have a dwarfism daughter type thing. So it's like that, lots of variables in that equation, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So, obviously recently you've been more kind of trying to share your story, or I guess kind of build things from a social media standpoint on, like I said, Instagram and TikTok. And, I guess what would you say kind of like maybe before we get into that part of it, I'll ask you this, I guess, kind of what's your general message that you're trying to get out there for people?
So, people are so fascinated to know my story, to know what it's like to be me. And really, it's something that almost catches me off guard when people remind me, oh, you're a little person. What's that like? Because, I don't think of it. I'm looking at the world through this set of eyes, and the world looks normal to me. I'm not looking at myself. So I don't see how much I stand out. And so just my whole life, there's been a lot of curiosity. There's definitely been some disparaging things said and done, and some discriminatory behaviors that others have unfortunately used towards me. But for the most part, it's just a lot of curiosity and trying to educate people about maybe a term that they don't realize is offensive. I definitely will talk about the M word, which is midget. A lot of people don't know that's offensive, and I can explain why in just a moment. But it's a lifelong trying to educate people that there's kinder terms, and I really latched on to inclusion recently. Like that's been something I think people are talking about more, and that conversation I don't think was really being had when I was a little girl. And a little bit over a year ago, our daughter, who's tall, average height, she was diagnosed with autism, and that was a total like curveball. I didn't know how to handle that. And I definitely went through a grieving process and came out of it realizing, she's just different like me. It's going to be fine. And it just made me realize, like, I want to make the world a more inclusive place for her. It's not so much about me trying to fit in the world, but it's me trying to make the world more inclusive for my kids. And so I started a social media page with that being the main thing, called That Little Mom. I started first on Instagram and then moved to TikTok, and I've had some stuff go viral, which we can go into in a little bit, but I've really been overwhelmed by the opportunity I've seen where people are latching onto this idea. People are already on it, or people, there's the trolls. It's really felt good to realize that this is an important thing to talk about, and not just for people who are physically different or mentally different, but just everyone has a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. All right. Well, I definitely appreciate what you're saying about inclusion. I agree. I think it's definitely a topic that is getting more attention and needs more attention. I mean, there's so many aspects of inclusion and kind of what that means, just in terms of creating a sense of belonging for people and them being accepted for who they are and kind of having a place in society. So, I understand, probably what has brought you in some way to this and the importance of it in terms of like your own life stories. So maybe if we could just talk a little bit about that, kind of like your experience with either inclusion or feeling, I guess, on the opposite end, not included, right? And kind of like how life was for you as you kind of went through, growing up and kind of being who you were and some of the things you experienced. So if you want to kind of share some of that with us, that'd be great.
Yeah. So like I said, my parents are average height, and I don't even know if they understand what their secret sauce was to raising me the way they did, but they raised me with, I just think the right way, having one child with a disability. I really feel like I was blessed to have an outlook that maybe some other people don't have that have the same condition. But it was interesting. I had to be told that I had dwarfism. You think that would be pretty obvious to me, but it wasn't. And so when I was in a special pre-K program, and there were these little boys, and I remember this, they would call me a baby, but they weren't doing it like to be nasty. They genuinely thought I was a baby because I was so little. And they're my peers, and I'd have to be like, I'm not a baby, stop calling me that. And I went home and I told my parents about what happened, and I was like, just frustrated and upset. And they had a family meeting. It's just weird that I remember this because I was so young, but we had a family meeting in their room. My dad was getting dressed it wasn't the most formal thing. He was getting dressed for a church assignment. And I don't remember everything, but I just remember him saying, like, you're just going to be tiny, and, that's not a big deal. You're going to be able to do a lot of things, and you'll just be tiny while you do it. And there was nobody crying. There was nobody upset. Everyone was like, there's 6 kids in my family, so everyone was just hollering and just being rowdy like a 6-kid family would be. But, with that, I kind of, just realized, okay, it's not that big a deal. And what's interesting is back then in the media, there weren't really any good role models or references to what dwarfism is. And so they told me, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs, you're a dwarf. And that's like, they did the best they could. That was the best example they can come up with, but there was nothing else to compare. And so anyway, and I'll get back on that in a minute, but
Sorry.
As I grew up, kids would call me midget, and I would just educate them like, I'm not a midget, I'm a dwarf, or I have dwarfism. And usually once they got to know me, they didn't care. That wasn't really a big deal. It's just kind of, when you first see me, I look different. Mm-hmm. And as I grew up, I kind of I think it'd be different if I was a really shy person, but I'm actually pretty outgoing and love attention. So I kind of used that to help me run for student government, and I won every election, and probably wasn't the most credible person to be doing some of those things, but I really had some unique opportunities, and I think it was with the help of the attention I get. And I kind of became a class clown, and in college I did stand-up comedy, and a lot of my bits, as you can imagine, had to do with dwarfism and making fun of the people that ask the dumb questions. And anyway, just as I moved along, with regards to inclusion, it didn't really hit me how important it is until I became a mom, and until my oldest daughter, who's almost 4 and is tall, she was diagnosed with autism, which that's a whole different world for me. But I realized that in a similar way, this isn't, maybe people would think it must be so hard to be a little person, or it must be hard to be have autism, when really it's just a different way to be. It's not, there's no standard for how a person should be. And I think
Right.
a lot of people are stuck on that idea. And that's when I went to the library, and I was looking up books on inclusion, and they always had to order them because they never had like a section available for that. And I just piqued my interest. This was about a year ago, and I decided to start a social media page, and I was gonna, I've educated on autism and dwarfism, mostly things that I know, because I can't really tell other people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really helped me, because it's one thing when kids called me a midget, it wasn't that hard, but I imagine it was a lot harder for my parents and my family.
Yeah.
But I just,
but why do you think
really,
that was? Why do you think it was harder for them?
because like they don't know what's going on in my head. They don't understand that I knew I'm not a midget, and I was able to brush it off quickly. I think the harder parts of my life were maybe I didn't date a whole lot, and like, especially I grew up in an average height world. So not going to, being so popular in high school, but never going to a dance. I did go to a few, but they were with friends, and not having those typical romantic connections. That was kind of hard. The times that maybe my group of friends wanted to do some physical activity to bond, and I couldn't do that, kind of feeling left out. Those were kind of the more harder times. Not so much the name calling, it's the things where people don't think about it, like where you're excluded.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, and kind of doing some research about this topic and stuff in preparation for for our discussion, one of the things that came across about the importance of social inclusion was the fact that people feeling like they have a sense of presence in their, and like you said, that sense of presence. Well, you didn't say this, but I'm thinking about it in terms of what you just said, just like, that you're just a part of it, in the sense of like, people can recognize me, or I can even, be a part of the things that they're doing. Like, that there's not things I can't do, things I can do, but just be a part of whatever. Right. So if like, if we're going to go do an obstacle course, well, okay, we won't invite her to that or whatever,
Yeah.
So then it kind of obviously creates that, not being included, but maybe I could go and be a part of it in some way or whatever, or give me the opportunity, right? Like, let me be a part of it in some level. And probably the same with dating, right? Like, just kind of like, okay, here I am, I'm in this place of, popularity, I'm part of student council, stuff like that. But then in the dating world, I don't have this sense of presence. Like, how do people view me from that perspective? So I'm lacking maybe that feeling, which, like I said, some of the research I talked about was really an impactful part of not feeling included, is not having that sense of presence, or feeling like we don't have that sense of presence in our social circles or whatever it may be. So I don't know. Yeah, I just might be talking. I don't know if that creates any kind of thoughts or response on your end, or if that you connect to that at all, or.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I was talking to my husband the other day. Like I said, he's a little like me. And there was a fifth grade field day where we competed against other schools in the Vegas Valley. And I had to do a tire roll activity. So I didn't do the relay. And I won. And I thought, I didn't think anything of it as a kid. I just was like, cool, I won. And I thought back and I was like, I bet you the PE teacher was very mindful about what my physical abilities were. And that was an activity to include people who aren't fast, and I could get under the tire and really control it really well because it was practically my height. And, and I don't know, that's inclusion there. And, and a lot of times people miss that. They don't think about it. And,
Yeah, it's like looking for a way to provide that inclusion rather than, it's like, looking at you, making a judgment, and then just automatically kind of like, okay, you can't be a part of this, but where can you be a part of it, or what can you do? And I think and maybe part of, for you, like you said, maybe your parents did such a good job at kind of giving you a feeling of inclusion and belonging, that maybe compensated in some ways for some of the struggles like in society, but it does sound like they did a really good job at helping you feel like you belonged and I don't know if that is accurate or
No, definitely. I wanted to do softball. They let me do softball. I sucked at it, but they let me do it. And as a little girl, and I think about, I used to play in mud, and I made a perfect mud ball one day, and my dad showed it off to the whole family and was so proud. And it's a mud ball, but he, I think, had the wisdom to, like his sons played lacrosse and did great. Rachel can make a perfect spear out of a mud ball. And, they really highlighted my strengths, even if maybe they were probably silly ones, but just really helped me feel really proud of myself.
Yeah, no, that's great. Because I think, over time, like, again, kind of going back to some of the research I was looking at, it talks about the impacts of social exclusion on people and kind of what it can do. Anything from the idea of like having an impact on our immune system to self-esteem, feelings of anxiety, depression. It can impact us in multiple of ways when we feel excluded. So like for you, like when you think about things like that, like depression or anxiety, is there any connection there where times maybe you felt that way because of the exclusion or anything like that? Or
yeah, so this is kind of a story I'm a little bit embarrassed about, but I think it's important to get out there. But definitely I've experienced depression. It's kind of one of the funny things where people are like, oh, it must be hard to be a little person. I'm like, least of my problems. But there probably is very likely a connection in some aspects. But I do battle with depression sometimes. And there was a time in college where a gentleman I was interested in, who was a good friend of mine, he had an award show, and so I went with him. Well, I invited myself to go and sat next to him, and then halfway through realized he's on a date, and I'm sitting here like, this is so embarrassing. And I was mortified, and I went home. I quickly left. I went home, and I've only once in my life had a migraine, and I cried so hard because I just felt stupid, and I also felt like excluded from, because obviously he was average height. He was actually like 6 something. He was a really tall guy, and it's not necessarily about what he did to me. It's just maybe about this general feeling of like, I don't get to date,
tall people
that I feel compatible with, like we're best friends, so I think there's some ounce of compatibility there, but like, I just felt devastated, and it is hard. It does take a toll on you, and you do see people with my condition who, I I want to be careful with this because I don't know their whole situation, but you know, a lot of times they'll go on disability and kind of not be as social, which, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that's a bad thing, but I just wonder if maybe a reason is because they never felt included. But again, I don't know the whole story of their why, but you do see that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like in kind of just talking a little bit more about like you said, you shared that moment. So like in dealing with the like times where maybe those situations have created a feeling of depression, does that then compound itself, or how do you feel like it, you know, you've been able to manage that then over time?
You know, it's luckily I excel in a lot of things. It's luckily, you know, I don't face rejection everywhere. And, you know, my disability isn't as debilitating as maybe some others. And so there's a lot of strengths I have. Like, you know, when I was in a stand-up comedy club in college, we'd sell out our tickets. And, you know, it was kind of not said but known that most of these people were here to see me, even though there was other comedians. And, you know, I did very well in that. And, you know, I've experienced success in other things that I think kind of helped me feel pride and like proud and have kind of helped, but I don't think that's the same for every little person. You know, my husband, Greg, he's also outgoing like me. And he, especially being a male that's a little person, has definitely experienced more rejection in the dating world, because there's that, you know, my sister who's 5'10" doesn't want to date somebody who's, you know, smaller than her, and you know, that's kind of a social standard we have. You know, so that was really hard, but he also has his skills that I think kind of helped him press forward and I don't know, maybe get him out of the depression sometimes. Right. Definitely I have more depression than him, but
well, I think a lot of it for me, and this is just my thought about it, is that it starts with a sense of self-acceptance too. Like if I don't feel good about who I am, if I don't kind of have that sense of self-acceptance, which it feels like you've been good with throughout your life, you know, then we're always going to be kind of like disappointed in something more so if we don't have that just initial kind of self-acceptance. And like I said, it seems like you definitely are good with that. You own it, you embrace it. Like I said, it always doesn't always maybe work out the way you want to, like with dating and stuff like that, or not that it didn't work out, because obviously love great, we're married, but just starting out with that feeling of, or that sense of self-acceptance, I think is huge in those kinds of situations. I don't know if you have thoughts on that or agree with that, or.
Yeah, totally. And it also helped me like I don't have bitter feelings towards men that I was interested in and didn't want, like, you know, because you have to have that interest. And I came to acceptance even in those things. So it's not like I blindly am like, well, at least I'm a good comic, you know, or at least like, I think it kind of helps. There's something where I'm able to be like, okay, that didn't work out. I can accept that and move on. But definitely in the initial part, it's a heartbroken.
Right. Well, and I think, you know, again, one of the things too with the notion of like the social exclusion and some of the impacts it has, one of the things that I'd read with that list of things was self-esteem. But I think one thing that I admire about you is it does feel like you're very courageous in terms of like trying new things or putting yourself out there. Like I said, stand-up comedy. I mean, most people would never even think about doing that. And then just kind of taking these things on and really challenging yourself. I assume that's, you know, partly in base because you've been able to have somewhat of a pretty healthy self-esteem, you know, and again, whether that's been helped by family or just feeling supported or encouraged over the years. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or that part of it.
Definitely like the support of my family, and like, you know, when I I was crying to my dad. I cried to my dad a lot. He's all the time.
Dads are good for that.
He's kind of my guy
Mhm.
that I talk to about things, especially before I was married. But around that same time where I felt that rejection from that, interest I had, I was telling my dad, like, I just don't understand, why doesn't he see that we're compatible, and like, maybe I could convince him we are. And my dad just interrupted me. He's like, no, you're not going to have to convince anyone to be in love with you. Like, you're a catch, and the right person will be someone who sees that. And this is, everyone has to go through this. And like, when he said that, I just realized I was forgetting my strengths and who I am, and so stuck on I had to make something work of that. And like, almost as if it was like my only chance, which it wasn't, of course. But like, it has to do so much with my parents and my upbringing, also my faith. I've always felt a really close connection to God, and through prayer and various things, I've had a sense of what he has in store for me, and what, how he feels, and my strengths. And, during those dark times, they definitely helped carry me through that.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It's great to have that support. And like you said, even just that backing of like, no, you have worth, you are great as you are. And the person that you're, that you want to be with is somebody who's going to see that for what it is, not that you have to try to convince them in any kind of way. So, but like I said, it definitely, like from the self-esteem standpoint, from the courageous standpoint of working, like wanting to do new things, try new things. I mean, even we've talked in the past, and just, like even just the notion of being courageous about having a child. I mean, there's I think a lot of people don't realize even just the risk of having a child as a little person. And I think you've talked about that before, where it's like, there's so many potential complications or potential, whatever that can go wrong. I mean, that's even courageous. And here you are having your second baby, and it's like, but that's a pretty courageous act in and of itself.
Yeah. And it's, it's really been interesting to be a mom and to go through the journey of being pregnant. As a little person, there's the genetics of it. Like Greg and I both having dwarfism, is we have a dominant, and we each have a dominant and recessive gene for dwarfism. And so when the dominant genes pass on and the recessive genes pass on, that's somebody that's a dwarf, or excuse me, I don't like saying a dwarf. That's somebody with dwarfism. So there's a 50% chance of that happening, where I send the dominant gene, Greg sends recessive, or vice versa. And that's what we have with the baby I'm pregnant with right now. And then if we both send the recessive gene, the baby is average height and doesn't carry dwarfism at all, nor can they pass it on under any circumstance other than just a spontaneous mutation. And then and that's 1 in 4. And then there's a condition called double dominance, which is where both Greg and I send the dominant gene to the child, and that's a lethal condition. And it's really scary because, the little people community, you can be really tight with them if you want to be. And there's support groups, and there's conferences, and I know a lot of people that have had that happen, and it's scary because you don't diagnose the baby right away with that. And especially with how we do it, my insurance denied the amniocentesis, so we had to wait longer. And it was scary when at 25 weeks, our baby's measurements started falling behind. And my doctor, who's never, is a high-risk doctor and is a great doctor, but also has never treated anyone or diagnosed anyone with this condition, because there's not many of us, wasn't sure, and he had to call his colleagues. And it definitely was really scary, and could put me into some dark times. And our baby, we know now, is fine and healthy, but there's still a part of me that maybe doesn't trust it all the time. I had a panic attack a few weeks ago during an ultrasound, even though the baby looked fine. Just that fear.
Yeah.
But that's a part people don't realize is it's scary. And I've had trolls. I've gotten really popular on TikTok and Instagram, which is a blessing and a curse, and everyone has trolls.
Mm-hmm.
But I've had trolls that say nasty things like, how dare you pass on your dwarfism to somebody else and make them suffer, which is a very ableist view of that. And but it does, I don't necessarily believe what they say, but it does put lightly a very real, like, yeah, I can pass on dwarfism to my kids, or I could have a double dominant baby. Like, that's a really hard part of being pregnant.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, what I've said is that, it's great just seeing your courageousness about, going about this and, taking those risks. And like I said, a lot of people don't really recognize that. And of course, there's always going to be haters. But that's the notion, again, that it's kind of sad in this whole thing, is that we have to see people fight for inclusion rather than just having inclusion kind of freely given. And so I think that kind of circling back to your quest for that and kind of, message for people to want more of that in our society is really important, because we shouldn't have to fight for that in the ways that we have to fight for it when we're not a part of, or we don't fit a certain mold or a certain way of looking or being or whatever it is. But that we just as a society look to have that inclusion for everybody in whatever way that we can. So kind of where are you at in that process? I know like we've touched on your social media a little bit and kind of where it's at, but like, do you want to talk about kind of how that's been going for you, and again, what you're hoping to accomplish with that?
Yeah. It's been great. I have a lot of support, and it's kind of funny to have to remember that my audience is new, because I talk about this stuff so much. I'm like, oh, I must be exhausting my audience. But I just realized, no, so many people don't understand, like, the M word's offensive because it's not really a medical term. It comes from the freak show era. Not a lot of people know we don't appreciate having our heads patted, like when people talk to us. And no one's ever done that to be mean to me. They just don't think about it. And that I get shamed for wanting to be a mom and excluded from, like, people think I should be excluded from that. And it's been great to see support. And it's also in a way been great to see people who are stuck in ableist views. And ableist is where, somebody looks at somebody being different as, like, either having a mental hinderment or a physical disability as being less than, under the ideal, less than the ideal, when really it's just a different state of being. That's what ableism is people that have that view. And I get a lot of people stuck in that come at me to shame me, and it doesn't so much hurt as much as it fuels my fire of, like, I got to do more. I can go on other things. There's been things I've been shamed about with my daughter, and it's just fuel that, like, okay, people need to see things and see me as a person, and and I need to also get better. I'm not great at always seeing things from somebody else's perspective, especially, like, I can't speak for everyone with disabilities because I don't know what it's like, and I've been able to learn a lot.
Yeah. No, I think just even having people in your life that kind of can help you with that perspective, or like you said, there's always things for us to learn. I know my brother and his wife are a big part of what's called the Challenger baseball program. And it's up in, I don't know if it's throughout the world, but I know they have it up in Canada where they're at. And it's for, people with Down syndrome or autism or whatever. And it's a baseball program that they're a part of that helps these kids have the opportunity to experience that sport. And, it's a great program, but they're definitely advocates for inclusion in that level. And they have a good friend that has a Down syndrome son. And so they're very, and there's a word, like you said, the M word, and then there's the R word,
Yeah.
when it comes to Down syndrome, that they are very proactive about people not using and stuff, and the offensiveness that goes behind that. So again, there's these different levels of things that, that we see out there, and we, it's great to see programs and things of that nature that where people are being proactive about, hey, let's try to give a sense of inclusion, because these people deserve it. I mean, they're not cast-offs, and but they deserve to have a sense of inclusion in our lives and in our society. And so it's great to see you advocating for that, and trying to push away the people that are, again, they're going to be who they're going to be. They're going to be trolls. They're going to be negative, but they're not living your life, and they're not,
Right.
they're not in that space. And so so it's good. Yeah, it's great to see that. So any other kind of tips or things that you want to share with people that might be listening, just as far as either what you've experienced or things that you would hope that people would kind of take away from this?
Yeah, definitely try and take away assumptions. A lot of people assume things about me that aren't true, and those assumptions can be hurtful sometimes. And most of the time, when somebody excludes me or is maybe, I don't want to say rude, but says something that isn't right, it's because they made an assumption. And usually it's behind a good intention. And be willing to talk to people who have a difference. And I love when people ask me about, like, wow, you're a little person, and I'm very chatty, or especially like most frequent, like every day that I go out in public, a kid is, Mom, look at the midget, or look at that little mom, and most of the time the parents are just embarrassed and want to they don't realize that what they're doing is harmful, because they whisk their kid away like I'm something to be ashamed of. We don't talk about that person's difference. That's a taboo thing, when really what should be done. And I understand not everyone's comfortable going up to me and saying, hi, my kid wants to know more about you. But it could be as simple as the parent being like, yep, she's different. Do you want to say hi? Because I usually try and say hi to kind of show the kid that I'm a person and kind of like humanize myself. So like, don't be afraid to say hello, and maybe give space for a person to maybe talk about what their needs are. And when you are in a situation where somebody in your group has a difference, think of ways to include them, rather than, oh, I don't want to invite, like, I don't want them to come because I don't want them to feel left out. You're leaving them out.
Right. There it is, right?
Yeah.
Well, and I agree. I mean, I think that's great advice, as far as like, even just like, again, that obviously it starts with the top down, and our level of comfort as parents and being more comfortable with things. And then that helps us to teach our kids in that way, and then helps them to feel more comfortable in those spaces. But like you said, it's just like, it's by not wanting somebody to feel uncomfortable, we end up leaving them out, which then just totally is the opposite direction, which again, it's almost like you think, okay, I can see, the intent. They don't want to make anybody feel bad, but they're making them feel bad, so just kind of changing that dynamic or that perspective, and really just looking more for the opportunity to create inclusion is, it's super important. So
no, I have one last thing. If you're uncomfortable, maybe talking, like, let's say there's somebody in your group who has a child with Down syndrome, and maybe they're grief, because for me, I went through grief with my daughter's autism, or like, I don't assume everyone goes through grief, but it's kind of common when it's a new thing. Go follow people on social media that parents of somebody with a difference, or a person with a difference. They will educate you, and it's a safe space. So my social media is full of that, and I learned so much. So definitely go follow people on social media if you want to learn more.
Yeah.
about a specific difference someone might have.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that's good. Some good advice, and I appreciate you coming on, Rachel. So again, everybody remember, follow her at the Little Mom.
That
That's
Little
on
Mom.
at That Little Mom. Sorry, That Little
Yeah.
Mom on Instagram and TikTok, and you'll also be entertained. There's some great stuff on there. Husband is super funny as well too.
Yeah, he is so funny. He reminds me. Yeah, every day he's
right.
like, that video I was in went viral, Rachel.
Right. He's got some gifts there too. So it's great stuff. So thanks again for coming on and sharing your story and talking about this important subject of inclusion. Because like I said, again, on the opposite end, it's not only just the notion of exclusion, it's there's ripple effects to that, like they said, the self-esteem, the mental health aspects, depression, anxiety, what that create. So trying to help people feel that sense of belonging is so important. So thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right.